They were so bad.
Thank you all very much for being here today, and I hope you learned something about the process of writers and what they do. I think it's really a neat thing that we have writers at the college that are doing a lot of great writing, and some of you might not know about their work, but it's nice to learn about it. So welcome, please, Jeff Hardin and Dean Day.
Are you ready?
Yeah, we're getting there.
Okay, good. So again, thank you for being here. I am Victoria Gay, and I'm really, really happy to get to have a conversation with my friend and colleague, Professor Jeff Hardin. Mr. Hardin earned his Bachelor of Arts in English from Austin Peay University in 1990, and then his Master of Fine Arts in Creative Writing in 1993 from the University of Alabama, Tuscaloosa. And he joined the English department at Columbia State in 1994. Since that time, he has published 6 books of poetry, and he has copies of all of them here. He's also won quite a few awards for his poetry, and he's also a featured author at the Southern Festival of Books every year in Nashville. He has won let me see if I can find it here. He has won the Donald Justice Prize in 2015, the X.J. Kennedy Prize in 2017. He has published over 100 poems in many of the nation's leading journals, including the Southern Review, North American Review, and Hudson Review as well. Professor Hardin, I know you typically start every class meeting
Comp 1 classes.
with a poem. Would you like to start with a poem today?
Okay. All right, so this is not in a book. It's just a poem that I published in the Laurel Review 2 or 3 years ago. It goes from the title straight into the poem. So the title is, "Who Even Knows What His Own Voice Is? For it ebbs and flows like spring water, and so easily could be confused for a sparrow, for a dove, in the moments after sunrise. And maybe your voice is mine, or mine yours, and all things of the imagination interchangeable, as Williams told us between patients, their griefs entering his own. For how else be the happy genius of a household? Or why want only a singular voice anyway? When there are so many species of thoughts, so many butterflies to follow sunny days. For maybe you haven't heard the news yet, but you don't have to die in your own mind and heart, but have been welcomed into others. Mine, if you need rest. Mine, if this be your last day. As always it is, for we are never midway on life's journey, dear Dante, dear Issa, needing radishes to point the way. This moment too, ebbing and flowing, gathering David's psalm, for God is sheer beauty, all generous in love, and Rilke's 9th elegy, where we're the most fleeting of all. We who begin where we end, one voice into another, way leading on to way, for where else should we go but where we are going? The two of us gathering, whoever will go, me reaching your way, you reaching mine.
That's so rich and so full. I have a lot of questions here, and I'm just going to be kind of random and pull out one of them. Where did you find inspiration for that poem? Where do you find inspiration for your poetry?
I don't know. I don't really think of. I don't think I think in terms of inspiration. I think of like talking back to something, and I mean it could be, just be as random as me picking up a book and seeing the word voice, and then in my head some language starts. Who even knows what his own voice is? And then go from there. for it ebbs and flows. It could, like spring water, or maybe it could be confused for a dove, maybe it could be confused for this, and all this kind of stuff. And then all these voices start coming into the poem. And I think of just being open to whatever that process is. Right? So if I suddenly think of David's song, "For God is sheer beauty, all generous in love," it comes into the poem. And then somebody like Dante or Rilke, or but I kind of like those ideas. I like the juxtaposition of so many things. I got a dove and a spring and Dante and radishes and Rilke and David's song and me and you in a poem. It's all there. But I don't know, it's a mysterious process to me. I still don't really understand it. I do it every day. I write a poem every day practically.
How long have you been doing that?
Most of my adult life.
So did you start as an adult?
No. Well, that depends on who you ask. You know how those little kids are like 4, but they're like an adult. Apparently, that was me. So, but I really started writing poems about the 9th grade, and then, that was trying to write poems. And then by the time I got into college, I was writing poems almost obsessively every day. And then, there's been a little waning time periods of, 3 or 4 days where I wouldn't write a poem 15 years ago. But more recently, it's pretty much every day. And I'm suddenly feeling very odd because I realize I'm up here without my notebook, and I'm never not without my notebook. I think it's actually in my car. And so that notebook has every poem that I've written since May 29th. And every day, I haven't missed a day.
Is there a particular time of day that you like to write?
Yeah, 5 o'clock in the morning.
In the morning.
I get up at 5 every day. I don't know what you people are doing. You're sleeping. You're wasting your day. But I get up and I make coffee and sit in the sunroom. Or if the weather's really nice, I've got 3 porches, and I'll sit there and just see what happens. But I don't really think in terms of inspiration. I think of showing up. And I never know what's going to be there. But I feel very weird living my day without what shows up. If I got up and went about my day and I didn't write a poem, I'd be worried about what I missed.
Would you feel guilty?
No.
Oh, okay. You would honestly feel like you missed something.
I missed something. Yeah. The way I've been talking about it lately, and I've said this in a few instances, so it's recorded some places, but writing feels like living next to a really big woods. And every day I walk around in the woods, and every day I see something I've never seen before. And so if I go a day and don't do that, I'm living in the absence of something. And I don't even know what it is, which is really unbearable. I mean, I already live unbearably in the absences that are in my life. I can't deal with the one that I don't even know about. That absence is going to be haunting for me. So
you chose to write poetry, and of course your most recent collection is this one, A Clearing Space in the Middle of Being. We're going to talk a little bit more about that later on, hopefully. But why poetry and not short stories, novels, dramas?
I think probably because poetry, well, what's foregrounded in a poem is the word, right? I mean, a story is about a narrative, or really a short story is about a moment. Everything kind of turns on a moment. A novel, I can't write a novel. That's just not how my brain thinks. But what words mean and how they connect to other words, the implications and all of that, that's how I think. think in terms of a word. There's a French writer, Edmond Jobs. Is that how you say that? Jabes? Jobs? Job. Who says a word has a meaning, which leads to another, which leads to another, which makes us finally realize that we are only at the threshold of the word. That's pretty cool.
It's pretty cool.
And so that's something like that is what I feel. Like a word is like, it's like I climb inside a word and I'm wandering around and there's this vast heavens above and this depth and experience of what's in one word. And that's just one. And it's next door to another one. And I have to figure out how to get from that one to the other one. And I don't even want to leave the one I'm in because it's the word.
So it's a sort of stream of consciousness flow that, as it applies to poetry and like Joyce with the short story or the novel and so forth. And that's what makes your poems so rich and so full. So, when did you first start trying to publish your poems? When did you realize that you're good at it? When did you feel confident enough to send out that first poem?
Oh, well, I did send out my first poems when I was 18 in college. And that was Malcolm Glass, who was one of my professors at Austin Peay. And, you know, he pretty much said, yeah, you're already writing at the level of things that you see in literary journals. So Austin Peay has a journal called Zone 3. And it started in the spring of 1986, and I arrived in the fall of 1986. So they had published one issue, and then I was there as a creative writing student for the second issue. But they had an exchange program, and so there were lots of journals around, like out in the hallway, and guess what? Nobody reads them, except Hardin. And so, you know, those were just there for me, and I would read journals, and you know, you have to have some level of delusion. I would read something and go, oh yeah, my stuff's as good as that. And then I would send it. And then, you know, it would get rejected and then accepted and rejected and accepted. And so I began publishing when I was 18. And yeah, it is important to publish. But to me, I don't know, it's gonna sound really odd. It's important for me to get it published so that it's out of the way. It's not as though it's about like accolades or, I mean, yeah, I'd like to get published in Poetry Magazine or the New Yorker or something like that, but publishing is, okay, I can mark that off my list. That one is, and then I can go on.
It's finished?
It's finished. Well, no, it's not. That doesn't work either. But it gives me some, I don't have to send it or feel like I need to send it somewhere. And I send a fraction of the stuff I actually write to try to get published. But, you know, rejection is 90 or 95% of everything I send out is rejected. And, I mean, I would probably tell people this, all writing is almost always rejection. And I mean all of it, including this. Like, this is a book that's published, which is cool, but it's just another form of rejection because it won't be bought or read. It won't be in a store for people to find. It won't get reviewed. But there's still the poem I'm going to write tomorrow. And so it isn't whether it gets accepted, rejected, bought, not bought, is not really even the point. There's the next thing to find tomorrow. And this at least gives a package thing that I can set to the side to try to deal with all the other stuff I have in front of me. Does that make sense?
Sure. So all of these, do they represent a vision that you had of yourself as a poet? Did you know that when you started doing this, did you know that this is something that you would always do? um, was being an English teacher and a writer, was that what you always wanted to do? Or were there other things that you considered?
Yeah, I was going to be an engineer until I was in the 10th grade. I think I always thought I'd just be an engineer because I was really good at math and science. So it seemed logical that that would be where I would go. And then I can remember being in my 10th grade geometry class. And my 10th grade geometry teacher eventually became one of my colleagues here. But it was in that class that it was almost like a light bulb went on, and I thought, I'm kind of bored by math. You can always get the answer. And so much of my life, at least, and so much of other people's lives, we can't figure out the answers. And so I became more interested in the mystery, if that is one way to say it. And so I always read. I read a great deal. And then when I went to college, I studied English and I studied marketing. And I thought about becoming a pharmaceutical sales rep because that's where I was being pushed. And we'll see how that's turning out. I could have been really, really rich, but, soulless, I suppose. But did I ever think I would be a college professor? No. That was, I'm the only person in my family to go to college. And, when I went to college, I said pert near and heard instead of heard. When I got to the University of Alabama for graduate school, my other brother, Tony Early, says that he lost his bumpkin status. Well, I'm glad I can serve some role in people's lives. But I'm not the most polished person when I speak. I've heard myself because I've been videoed, and I think, oh gosh, I sound like I'm still on a creek bank with a bunch of drunk people.
Could be worse.
Yeah, but I like to think I'm educated, and I am. But my speech patterns, I'd rather exist on the page because that's just it. It's itself, and the rest of that, that's hard to deal with sometimes.
So you have alluded to the fact multiple times now that you read, and I realize that I'm, this is kind of a wild card question because I'm sure that we could fill the room with the people that you read, because you're known for walking around campus with stacks of books, and you have stacks of books in your car. I've seen them because I've looked in. But really, who do you read? If you were to give your students 5 people, 5 must-read people, who would those people be? I know that's a hard question. That's a hard question for you.
Well, my favorite novelist is Jose Saramago. He's a Portuguese novelist, won the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1998. So I would read his novels, and I'd begin with All the Names, which I think is hauntingly beautiful. You may be familiar if you've seen a movie called Blindness. That's based on one of his novels. Another movie called Enemy, which is based on a novel of his called The Double, where a guy discovers his doppelganger. But Saramago is so fascinating, and his language is very poetic and philosophical. So, he's always on my list. I like the poet Charles Wright. He was actually born in Hardin County, where I'm from. He was born in Pickwick Dam, which is a little community outside of Savannah, Tennessee, about 12 miles. And I'd put him on the list, but Czeslaw Miłosz, Milosz, is one of my favorite poets. he also won the Nobel Prize for Literature. And Wiława Szymborska, another Polish poet, and probably Seamus Heaney, Irish poet. But then, then there's Flannery O'Connor, and there's so many great authors. You pretty much have to say, well, what's in your book bag? Well, today it's my books, but what's in your car? What's in that 2 boxes of books that are in the trunk of your car? But yeah, I do. I wander around with books all the time. I can't imagine not reading several hours a day. I mean, what else are you going to do? Watch another episode of Criminal Minds? Yes, of course. Well, okay, yeah, that is what you're going to do, probably. But you could read something 30 minutes a day, an hour a day, and Mary Oliver says the season of curiosity is everlasting. So once you start, it starts awakening, craving more and more. So there's just more and more to find.
So writing for an hour or so every day, teaching
more than an hour.
More than well over an hour every day, grading papers, so forth. Then reading every day. Are there sacrifices that you feel like you've had to make in order to fine-tune your craft and in order to be a scholarly professor? Or do you just feel like that's the lifestyle?
I think it's just the lifestyle. Well, probably the sacrifice could be my 5 acres that I don't quite mow all of it. My porch rails might need painting. There's the things that need to be done, which sometimes I'm not really all that good at following through and getting done. But and probably sleep. Mm-hmm. I said one time, actually here recently, I was talking to somebody. I'm afraid to say this out loud, but my adoptive mother, whom I love, when I was, she's been a part of my life since I was 4 or 5 years old, and she married my father when I was, I think about 6. But she told me when I was 9 or 10 years old, she said, "You're a determined little cuss." And that's true. I'm a determined little cuss, and especially about writing. And I can remember the early years, even at Columbia State, where, that is fairly overwhelming. You're a new faculty member, you're trying to get on top of your teaching and prepare the test and the quizzes and all that. It's really time consuming. And I could have let go of some of the writing, but I'm a determined little cuss. And so if I have to stay up 2 hours after my wife goes to sleep and get 6 hours of sleep as opposed to 8, then that's exactly what I'm going to do, and what I've done. Now, that may not be the healthiest thing to have done early in my life, but I've done it. And maybe I don't require as much sleep.
Right.
My goal is to be awake all the time.
So would you consider that level of dedication to be one of the traits essential to being a successful writer? The willingness to give up sleep if you need to, the willingness to write every day. So those two, and any other tips maybe that you might have for folks in the audience who fancy the idea of becoming a writer someday.
I would just say that there's not one path to it. And I was just this past weekend at the Meacham Writers Conference on a panel with some other authors, Michael Knight who is at UT Knoxville. He made some comment about how he really just, he attempts to write 1,000 words a week. Now, he's a fiction writer. He writes novels, he writes short stories, but 1,000 words a week, which pretty much is what, 3 pages? Where Saramago wrote 1 page a day. And, he won the Nobel Prize for Literature. He wrote 1 page a day. So it doesn't have to be a lot. And I would imagine you could write 1 page in an hour, or maybe it takes you 2. Saving, it takes you, 12 hours to do one?
Yeah.
One, yeah, okay.
That's a good measure.
Kind of a ballpark estimate.
Yeah.
I'm trying to get. But, in terms of a tip, find your own path. That's my tip. So mine's at 5 o'clock in the morning, but that's not going to work for everybody. And there was someone who told me one time that my life was a poem. I wandered around in a poem, and then I had to try to figure out how to fit everything else within it. But I imagine most people don't get up every day inside this thing of writing. But you can carve out whatever amount of time that is. And for some people, it's Saturday night religiously from 6 o'clock to 9 o'clock, and that's the only time they've got. But you can still accomplish quite a bit there. I'll tell you this. There's a novelist, a friend of mine, Josh Russell, and Josh published a book many years ago called Yellow Jack, about the yellow fever in New Orleans. He wrote most of that novel on his lunch hours, and this is a lot of years ago. I think he was doing something with software, like a company, but on his lunch hours, he wrote, he kind of imagined a daguerreotype, this old photograph, the earliest forms of photographs, and he just imagined or looked at particular ones, and then he would come up with a story, and that would go a page or 2 or 3, and he would work on these during his office or during his lunch hours. And over a time period, he ended up writing a full novel. He ended up getting a job at Loyola, and then came to up in Atlanta, Georgia State College.
So moving back to your collections, I'll just read these titles off for everyone. Fall Sanctuary, and this one's my favorite because it has my favorite poem I taught. One semester, I had 9 baseball players in an English 1020 class, and I taught the Babe, and I love baseball, and you love baseball too, played baseball, so there's that one. We have Notes for a Praise Book, Restoring the Narrative, Small Revolution, No Other Kind of World, and then most recently A Clearing Space in the Middle of Being. Are these at all thematic? Do all these poems in these collections belong together? Is there a process for choosing the poems that go into each collection?
Yes. Yeah. I can say, for instance, with Restoring the Narrative, it's a collection of sonnets, and a sonnet is a 14-line poem, for those who need to know that. Iambic pentameter, I never thought I'd do any of that, but I had a friend, Will Mills, my best friend, who died in 2011 at the age of 41, and Will was a formalist poet. He wrote only in form, rhyme, meter, blank verse, and he was always trying to pull me over into doing that, and I basically just didn't, that wasn't how I thought. It wasn't the type of poems I was doing. But eventually I ended up doing that, and so I gathered a bunch of these sonnets I'd written over a several year period. And this book, the title, Restoring the Narrative, I can tell you where that came from. That came from watching political pundits saying, well, the Democrats own the narrative about healthcare. The Republicans own the narrative about taxes. And I got tired of hearing that. Owning the narrative. Owning the narrative. I know what that means. I studied marketing. So, but I started thinking about, like, I think we are within a narrative. We don't own it. We're not on top of it. And we don't weaponize it or politicize it. The narrative is bigger than us, and we submit to it. We find ourselves within it. So I began to think about all these poems I'd written and how to shape them, and I came up with 4 things. One was, well, we live in a time of competing narratives. So the first section of that book is essentially a kind of juxtaposition of different viewpoints. And then another section called Creekside, and that's made up of, 11 or 12 or 13 sonnets that are all numbered. And that's where my origin began. That's where my narrative began, on a creekside. And then my friend Tony that I mentioned, Tony early, he's always tried to get me to write a memoir. So I had a title, Upon Being Asked to Write a Memoir. So all of those poems are, well, if you tell your own story. A lot of years ago we read All Over But the Shouting by Rick Bragg. And, as good as that book is in many ways, it also brings up the problem of, like, when you tell your own story, you do a lot of this, right? You pat yourself on the back, or you exaggerate, or maybe you're just about as dishonest, or the potential for that dishonesty about self is just as prevalent as it is in our wider culture. So we live in a time of competing narratives. My narrative begins here. My memoir is probably just as problematic in me telling that narrative. So the 4th section is called Morning Porch, and it has 5 poems. And so that's me trying to get outside of my constructed thing, my house, myself. I want to get outside myself. I want to listen toward a voice that restores the narrative. And it's not mine.
So your poems, let's say in your latest book, are these all recent poems? Or are they poems that you've written over the years that you decided all kind of fit together?
That book is mostly before 2009.
Okay.
So probably 2006, 7, 8, 9. And I've been sending it out since 2009 and getting it rejected. And
Did it always have this title?
No.
Okay.
No. In fact, my first book, Fall Sanctuary, was originally titled Genealogy. And Mark Jarman, who picked that book for a book prize, said, I really love your poems, but that's not a good title. And he said, you got a lot of stuff in there about, like, well, there are poems. Late Summer Sanctuary, Early Spring Sanctuary, all this kind of stuff. And I also had these other poems, Love Poem for Moonlit Backyard, Love Poem for the Absolute. I don't know. So he would say, figure out something. There's a lot of the fall and there's these sanctuary poems. And, oh, no, he didn't say the fall. He said, many of the poems are about the fall of man. There's this kind of attempt maybe to still create or find sanctuary. So I came up with the title Fall Sanctuary. There is still sanctuary within the fall of man. But the title of that book, I hate to say it out loud because it's really terrible. And I have no idea what it had to do with the poems.
A clearing space in the middle of being.
Yeah, originally it was called Where the Bright World Ends. And I changed the title, the last place I sent it to.
Yeah.
And that's, but even once it was accepted, back in September, I think, of last year, I revised that book fully 6 times. And then the 6th time, I reordered the poems. And I hadn't done that the other 5 revisions. And that had to do with where I thought I wanted to start, what I was trying to say, and then where I was going to go with the last poem. So,
Do you want to talk about your cover art?
yeah, I'll say this: three of my books, beginning with Restoring the Narrative, and then this was the fourth one, Small Revolution. You probably can't see this, but there's a small tree in the forest being swamped, and someone said, "I'm so rooting for that tree." And then that book, all of those covers are by one of my former genius, brilliant students, John Searle, who's a graduate of Columbia State, and he does photography just as a part of his life. It's not his profession, but he's really good. And I just threw in this image of the leaf with other things, and they did not know that he was my student. I threw in Winslow Homer paintings, some North Carolina artists that I had seen, 4 or 5 Homer paintings, 4 or 5 of these, and I found some of John's. I thought, well, maybe photographs. Let me throw some of those in. And they picked that, not knowing it was my student. And I don't know, there's just something wonderful about that for me, personally.
There is something wonderful, something almost magical about that, or providential, or something.
Yeah, and he was in my class, I think 2007. I think he graduated in 2008. And some of these poems I was actually working on when he was in my class. So a decade passes and his photograph is on the cover of the poems I was working on when he was in my class. I don't know what that is, except it's just cool, you know, and unprecedented, you know, I don't know, it's just, well, the book ends with giving things back into mysteries, and that's just a mystery to me, another mystery.
It's a regenerative kind of thing. So, a lot of writers face writer's block. Do you ever worry that you could run out of things to say?
No.
Those of us who know you and talk to you on a daily basis pretty much know you're never going to run out of things to say.
No.
But, no?
No, well, there's just too much in the world. There's too much in language.
But you look at the world.
You don't?
Not everyone does. I'm
Well-
not saying I don't. But you truly look at it like an artist would look at an object that he or she is about to paint and decide this is what this truly looks like. This red over here is a different shade from this red over here because of the light or shadow or whatever. You truly examine the world. Not everyone does that, I don't think.
Well, yeah.
Like with words, when you were talking about it earlier. You want to know all that that word contains and all that it leads to.
Yeah. I think I want to know, I want to know everything. It's just, oh my gosh, that just sounds so pompous, but, and I want to know it all simultaneously, at the same time. I don't know if that makes any sense.
Sure it does.
Have y'all ever seen Big Fish?
Mm-hmm.
You know the movie Big Fish? And there's that one moment where like the popcorn is up in the air and it just stops. You know, like everything stops when he sees the girl. And he's just walking through that and having to brush things aside. I want something like that, except it's everything. Everything, everyone, every word, every image, everything of my life that has ever existed, every moment at the same time. And I want to know how they know each other and how they, like one teaches me how to think about the other and vice versa. Every moment is like both vehicle and tenor. You know, like the entire thing is metaphor. just swirling. All those electrons and protons that are, like in the kind of visual we have of that, all of that stuff is just there, and it's all interchangeable throughout time and space, from one person to the next. I don't know if that makes any sense, but
So you told me one time that you had asked some of your students to write about something that dazzles them.
yeah.
And so I think, just kind of a generalization of what you've just said is that you are dazzled by all sorts of things, but you allow yourself to be dazzled. Do you think some people don't allow themselves to be dazzled, or do you think they're just not dazzled?
I don't know what.
And let's just throw in with that, how does your poetry and being a poet impact your teaching? If you can put all that together.
Yeah. Well, I don't know whether other people, I don't know if people are dazzled or if they.
I'm dazzled.
Okay.
By all kinds of things.
I think some of my students who were kind of like nodding off this morning might not have been dazzled with me. There's probably somebody here today.
But you were dazzled, so that's
Yeah.
what's important. Yeah.
But, there's a guy, William Maxwell, who says that why people don't walk around in a continual state of astonishment is beyond me. And that's the way I feel.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't understand why. There's a photograph I have of my daughter. She's 22 now, but when she was really young, my wife took this photo of her, and she had reached up and pulled down a tulip poplar leaf off of a tree in front of our porch. And the way that she looks at that leaf, it's like she isn't looking at the leaf, she's beholding the leaf. And shouldn't we? Shouldn't we behold, everything, that's right in front of us?
Well, you said earlier that you were this 4-year-old who was a grown-up. Certainly you ought to be able to be this grown-up who's a 4-year-old.
Yeah, there's a 4-year-old.
As well.
Oh yeah, well that's that makes sense. That makes way too much sense in my world, I suppose. But yeah, I think that child. Okay, well, I've gone this far like without a U2 quote, and for my students, this is a record. I mean, like this far into a discussion. But there's a very, very old song of Bono's where he says, into the heart of a child, I can stay a while. And I loved that music when I was a kid. There's so much about that. And my favorite song when I was 14 is a song called Scarlet. And it only has one word: rejoice. That's it. That's the only word in the 2.5 minute song. Rejoice. Language drops down in us, doesn't it? And it comes into us, and we take to ourselves certain words. And for somebody that the words they take to themselves, kind of create a self or an approach to the world. I mean, when is it Secretariat? It's one of those movies about horses. There's lots of them, right?
Seabiscuit.
Seabiscuit.
Is it Seabiscuit?
Is that the one with, he goes like, he found me. You ever seen this movie?
I've seen both of them, but I don't remember which one.
Oh, I remember that part. It's like he's so angry. It's like, but he found me. That mentality exists in some people that we know. Like, that is their thesis. He found me. And they go around, and it allows them to only see that. They only see how they've been wronged. I've spent all day in my office. I have 20, okay. I have y'all know Streamable? It's a website. You can take anything off YouTube, drop it in a Streamable, and then excerpt like these 25 seconds or a minute or whatever, and create a little clip. I have a clip that's been playing nonstop in my office all day. I do this occasionally. I'm not sure what this says about me, but I have a 25-minute clip, and it's from the song Magnified by U2. Justified till we die, you and I will magnify the magnificent. You know, Bono does this, magnificent. 25 seconds, and it starts up again. It's the only thing I've heard all day. I live inside the perpetual loop of those words. That's just today, but you know, some other day it'll be an REM song, or God forbid, a Duran Duran. Although, in my defense, there will be no Luke Bryan. Just saying.
Have you ever considered writing songs?
No.
Not working with a musician and composing?
I had one ask me one time. He said, "Dude," he said, we should write a song together." I said, "Dude, I don't know anything about writing a song," and I don't. But I could probably take somebody else's song and maybe say something about how it works or it doesn't work, or maybe make a suggestion. But I don't think I create music that way or create lyrics that way. I know that people do.
It's a different set of conventions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just not, I would get tracking on a word, and that's not going to work in country music.
So.
It's my little jab at country music. I'm named after Waylon Jennings.
Yeah.
My middle name is Waylon. I met him many years ago, and told him, I said, "You're my dad's favorite singer. I'm named after you. My middle name is Waylon." He looked at me with what I took to be a measure of shock and pity. Like, who would do that to a child?
Yeah. So is there anyone, any poet, any writer that you would still like to meet, or that you regret that you'll never get to meet, or?
I don't know.
I mean, you meet a lot of writers.
I do, yeah.
You've gotten to speak at multiple institutions across the country. You got to teach at Vanderbilt one semester. So is there anyone that you just absolutely need to meet, or that you won't ever get to meet, that it makes you sad, or is that important?
No, I don't. I probably don't. I don't know that that's all that important to me. A lot of times I don't even get my books signed. I mean, if I have a book and I meet somebody and I think, well, a lot of people get their books signed. I don't typically even do that. No, probably not. I don't think that's.
Okay.
I suppose I could have met Jose Saramago. I know one of my friends, Marion Berkeley's in New York, and she takes author photographs. And one of Saramago's novels from many years ago, and the press release photo that he used for a long time was one by her. So I'm like one step away from my favorite author, favorite novelist.
If you did meet him, what would you say?
I'd probably just thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Well, I've said that to people before. Thank you for sitting down and doing the hard work of writing. And this particular text means something to me. I love this poem, or I love this novel, or this short story, because it, in small and sometimes big ways, profound ways, I think we are changed by what we read. So I'm not exactly the person I would have been. I don't even know who that person would have been, but I read, this short story, or this poem, or this play, this speech, whatever. Somebody had to sit down and do it. Had to sit down and write that song. And if they didn't do it, it wouldn't be there.
Does reading others make you a better writer?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think you get a sense of what the possibilities are, and then also what's not there. Like what do I notice that this author is doing, but in what way, what does that look like in my world?
So are you the best poet now that you've ever been? Or have there been times in your life when you feel like you were a better poet?
I don't know if I think in those terms. I just think about what
There's not a, I did my best work then, and gee, it's gonna be hard to live up to that.
I think those determinations are so often wrong on a personal level, and then, well, I mean, I can tell you this, that in Notes for a Praise Book, this book came out in 2013. The earliest poems were written in 2000. So I was 32, and then I was, 45 when the book came out. But and many of the poems did not get into journals. A lot of them did, but there's still a good number of these that never got into literary journals. And so as I was putting it together and it got accepted, and then we're getting down to crunch time and you do all the kind of last minute things, there was a poem in it that I almost took out because it never got accepted anywhere. I wasn't exactly sure it was as strong as some of the others, and I wrote my publisher and I said, I've got this friend who always says, you got to figure out which poem it is in your book that sells it and read it.
Like the best song on an album.
Yeah, it's like the best.
Yeah.
You put that forward. So, like in your opinion, what's the best poem in my book? And he said, well, I want to raise this question with some of my readers that are friends. And so they all got together and they decided that it's this particular poem, the one I was going to take out. I was like, really? And so there's something about that whole process that got me to understand how what matter. When I had said something like this in my classes, you have to let matter what matters to the person to whom it matters. And maybe what matters to me personally in specific poems, to another person when they read it.
So what makes a good poem?
Something that's memorable, I think. The language is heightened to some degree. It appeals to images. Maybe it has something that it reaches a conclusion or a kind of language that we hadn't heard before or heard quite that way.
So a new way to express something universal?
Yeah, that sounds good to me.
Does it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I mean, as you're asking that, I'm thinking, all right, so in my first book, there's a poem called Genealogy, which for me was the original title of the book. And I do like that poem. It's one of the two poems of mine that I actually know by memory. And I know so much of other stuff, but I don't tend to sit down and memorize my poem.
Do you want to recite it now?
Yeah, okay. Genealogy. No one back at the house. I wander out, cross the fence, follow the path the cows have made their own. Something in my brain is washed by sunlight, a yellowing inward of warmth and searching. And I stand on a knoll where a shack used to be, a century ago, when a man and a woman lying down at night could hear, despite the crickets, the stillness of the other. I think inside me a tenderness exists, bound to vines the fence row makes a home for, and to the trace of air in the hickernut's hull. I belong to barns, which belong to weather and weeds, and the careful years that do their best, but lose us. I like that.
Well, those are all my questions, but do you have things that you'd like to say? And then folks out there might like to ask you some questions as well.
Well, we could just ask questions, I guess, if y'all have something.
Anybody have questions for Professor Hardin?
Jeff, you talked a little bit about it, but one thing that seems to me to be big in your life, because we talked about this a lot, because we both like music, is music. But you have a variety of bands that kind of, have lyrical viewpoints that you really gravitate towards. And I don't really think that I can't really tell from reading your work that you're really, grabbing their ideas, but there's something about their expression that seems to mean a lot to you, that you relate to in your own expression. Like I said, I can't see it actually in your work. I don't think you're copying or inspired much by them,
Yeah.
but you seem to really like their expression. You just want to talk about, you seem to have a real bond with a lot of really musical thought, the lyric, but also the music itself.
Well, I think I'm drawn to music I've always been drawn to music that has that's about something. Robert Bly has a line in one of his poems where he says, "Let's give up the notion that great music is a way of praising human beings." And when I read that makes a lot of sense to me. There is music that we listen to that's actually good. We like the song, we like the beat, whatever, but we are going to forget it, right? We're going to forget that song next year because it doesn't say what Dust in the Wind says, right? It doesn't say what, a John Mellencamp song says. Something that's really, really good is always going to be speaking. Born in the USA by Bruce Springsteen. 1984, I was 16, but I still listen to the song. I'm 51. There's a lot of, I'm not listening to Culture Club, right? They were very popular. I'm not listening to the Thompson Twins. I guess we were going on down to Electric Avenue, but those are references that people won't get. But you could look at our current stuff. There's lots of music that you're listening to, and it's enjoyable. It is. It's enjoyable music, but it's not going to speak to you forever. And I think you probably already have some sense of what those songs are. The ones that mean, they're on a little playlist or whatever, but you can imagine. I know my wife is tired of listening to Where the Streets Have No Name by U2, but that's the song that if I have to choose one thing to listen to for the rest of my life, that's a no-brainer. I'm going to listen to that. That's the most transcendent thing I've ever heard. It is the most transcendent thing I've ever witnessed live. Bono says God walks through the room. Well, that's what I want in my poems to some degree. I want some revelation. I don't think knowledge is something I possess. I think it's something that I approach and I come close to, and maybe I'll look upon it and it gives me something. It gives me an image. It gives me a little bit of language. And that language sometimes I don't ever get over. I don't ever get over that language.
Other questions? Okay.
I know that you give a lot of thought to your poetry, not just with like the message you're wanting, but also you attempt different structures.
Mm-hmm.
What are some of the favorite poetic forms that you've chosen to do? And if you don't mind, maybe pick out an example and kind of explain your thought process on not just the message itself, but how you went about choosing to implement this poetic form.
Well, so that was a question about form and implementing particular forms. Obviously, the sonnet is a received form, right? And I've written haiku and those types of things. Our friend Will Mills called me one time and said, "Let's write some haiku." And I said, "Screw haiku." I thought it was being funny. I said, "That's my short little poem. Screw one word on that line, and then below it, haiku. There's my poem. And then I wrote a bunch, but the forms I enjoy are the ones I kind of discover, if I am the person who actually discovers them. And there have been several that I've created. In fact, this newest book has these shapes of things where I'll do a little stanza, but I'll end on a word or two on a line by itself. The thought didn't finish, it's not symmetrical to the rest of the stanza. I've only got a word or two. But I would drop the next line, and then the last word of that line would be the opposite word of the one I just finished saying. I'd never seen that, but we talked about baseball, and so there was a guy named Wee Willie Keeler who held the record for most hits, singles. They asked him, how have you hit so many singles? And apparently he said, it's like the early 20th century, he said, I hit them where they ain't. So, and I feel that way about poems. A sonnet already is, but an acrostic sonnet, where I have a 14-letter word down the left-hand margin. We've seen one of those. I haven't. I don't know. Maybe it exists, but that'd be taking and creating something. I've done these poems, what I call watermark, where there's a 5-word phrase down the left-hand margin that's visible. You can see it, but the stanzas kind of snake over here and then stitch back through the words, and it's kind of a whispered prayer behind the poem. And that's a shape I invented just because I was with Michelle Miller, one of my poet friends here in Columbia, and I said, I think I'm going to take old phrases out of my poems and make them the titles of new poems. And then I wrote one. And because I went this way, and I'm a math-minded person, I went, that's you got an X and a Y axis. So I just took the phrase and went like that. And then I wrote these little stanzas, kept stitching back through. It was like a little spine. But because I'd never seen that, then I thought, well, there are all these 5-word phrases, and they come from literature. I have promises to keep. Robert Frost says, you must change your life. Rainer Rilke. Practice losing farther, losing faster. And then biblical phrases to make known the mystery. And so I created a whole book of these. It's not published yet, but I have a whole collection of those.
Have you submitted it?
Oh,
Has
yeah.
it been rejected a few times?
It's been rejected.
Yeah.
Claudia Emerson, who wrote the blurb for my second book, she died in 2014, but she told me in 2009 about that book of watermark poems. She said, oh, no one's ever done this. This book's going to get picked up immediately. That's been 10 years.
It's a relative term.
Yeah, it's been 10 years ago.
Yeah.
But the other poem I can quote is something along these lines, where I thought I'd never seen a poem where the last word of a really short 3-line stanza, the last word rhymes all the way down. I don't typically work in rhyme, but I wrote a poem called In Winter. It goes from the title into the poem. In winter, the pine tree's limbs filled with snow grow tense, with being on the verge, if not from weight, then from suspense, of crashing down along this length of side yard fence, which admittedly is little more than pretense and holds nothing in, but nonetheless provides a lens, a frame, through which most evenings I admire a late light rinse down the barn's roof of 50 years of hedge apple dents. There, where a child, I often climbed, but haven't since. Though where else ever felt so soul small and immense?
Any other questions? Well, thank you so much, Jeff.
Sure.
Enjoyed getting to do this. You were here how long? About an hour, and already the table looks like your office.
If anyone wants to come up here, Jeff will sign hundreds of his books for you.
Which one of these is yours? And which is that one yours?
It doesn't matter. I've got my tea over here.
hadn't drunk very much either. I'm looking for lipstick on here to see if one of these is mine. I'm not seeing any lipstick on this. I'll just take this one. That's your beautiful wife. Yes, your better half.
I did not notice you until the last little bit. This light is so.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you'd have